Good Sunday morning. This is Shindo. More news about NATO this morning. This is a really good article about what motivates the people behind NATO. No shocker, but very, very well written. Good article. Recommend it. This is from RT. The title of this article is Russia Offers NATO an Olive Branch, but is reconciliation in NATO's interest? Russia has invited NATO's military experts to Moscow in September and offered a, quote, positive program, unquote, for developing relations with the military alliance. But is reconciliation really what NATO is interested in? Russian Deputy Defense Minister Anatoly Antonov said the proposal was aimed at decreasing tensions and that Moscow was ready for a constructive approach despite differences between the two sides. Antonov said the meeting would promote a, quote, de-escalation of tensions and prevent military incidences on the contact line between the sides' armed forces, unquote. This is Moscow's response to the NATO summit held in Warsaw in July, at which it was confirmed that 4 more NATO battalions would be deployed to Eastern Europe NATO states. The bloc also reaffirmed at the summit its contention that Moscow is a, quote, source of instability in the region, unquote. An olive branch. If you were a pessimist, you might write off Russia's move as all talk and no action. But it's actually been backed up with at least one concrete public proposal. Safer flights over the Baltic, quote, as a matter of priority, unquote, if both parties agree. Antonov and Russia was ready to address, quote, mutual concerns, unquote, with its neighbors over military activity in border areas. NATO and Russia have traded accusations over their respective activities in the Baltic. NATO has repeatedly accused Russia of flying its jets over the region with transponders switched off, while Moscow has returned the same accusation, adding that alternative approach would simply be to cease flights near the Russian border. Whatever one may say about Russia and its role in its current conflict with NATO, this looks very much like a genuine effort to improve relations with a Western military bloc. Given the level of hostility between the two recently, it might have been expected that any kind of olive branch offered by Russia would be well received. Strangely, though, while the offer to perform safer sorties did receive some attention in recent weeks, the public invitation to embark on a joint program for developing relations in general has so far at least elicited very little public response from NATO and garnered scant media attention. One of the only responses has come from non-NATO members, Finland's Ministry of Defense, which released a statement calling Moscow's initiative, quote, interesting. Estonia's defense ministry has said it would carefully consider whether or not to attend consultations with Moscow in September, and others have said that no official invitation has been extended. But does NATO really want to mend fences with Russia? A little historical context is necessary to answer that question. In search of a mission. In 1951, NATO's first Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, remarked, quote, if in 10 years all American troops stationed in Europe for national defense purposes have not returned to the United States, then this whole project will have failed, unquote. By that measure, the NATO project has well and truly failed. 65 years on, American troops remain in Eastern Europe. NATO has expanded eastward to Russia's doorstep and recently launched the the biggest war game exercise in the region since the end of the Cold War. Even the German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier warned that such, quote, loud saber-rattling and shrill war cries, unquote, directed at Russia would serve no one. Quote, whoever believes that symbolic tank parades on the alliance's eastern border will bring more security is mistaken. We are well advised not to create pretexts to renew an old confrontation, unquote, he continued. When the Soviet Union ceased to exist in 1991, the alliance found itself with a bad case of thumb twiddling. The authors of an op-ed about NATO Expansion published in the Chicago Tribune in 1994 noted, quote, the first priority of any bureaucratic institution is to perpetuate its existence. The second is to expand its functions, unquote. And that's exactly what NATO did. It perpetuated its existence by offering membership to more and more states and expanded its functions by entering the business of fighting global terrorism and engaging in regime change operations. Both, to say at least, have had mixed results. In Europe, experts are increasingly inclined to call the latest standoff between NATO and Russia a new Cold War, while further afield, NATO interventions have wreaked havoc in the Middle East, helping to fuel the rise of the Islamic State, lining their pockets. But if there was no threat from Russia post-1991, why did the alliance continue to expand at all? Feast your eyes on an article brought to Twitter's attention by journalist Mark Ames. Published in the New York Times in 1998, it explained that Americans' arms manufacturers, quote, who stand to gain billions of dollars in sales of weapons, communication systems, and other military equipment, unquote, were spending millions lobbying for the expansion of NATO, enlarging the bloc. The Times reported, quote, would offer arms makers a new and highly lucrative market, unquote. NATO was central to their lobbying efforts because it simply offered, quote, so many opportunities, unquote. NATO rules conveniently require new members to upgrade their militaries, replace old Soviet-made systems. Thus, the sums arms makers spend on lobbying were, quote, relatively small compared with potential benefits in the new market provided by a larger NATO, particularly from the sale of big-ticketed items like fighter aircraft, unquote, the Times report said. Despite the facts, the biggest beneficiaries were American military contractors, the U.S. still contends that NATO was being expanded to, quote, unite and, quote, stabilize Europe. The fact that Russia, a significant part of Europe, was being locked out of new European, quote, security structure didn't seem to bother anyone. The Times report quoted a Republican aide who joked that contractors were so eager to sell arms that they, quote, probably be given landlocked Hungary a new navy, unquote. Another aide told the Times that Americans themselves didn't really care about NATO expansion. Quote, the only people who care about this are think tank folks and academics, unquote, he admitted. Yet today Americans are told they must indeed care about NATO, and they must care about it a lot. When presidential candidate Donald J. Trump suggests that NATO members not paying their bills should cough up or defend themselves, it prompts uproar. Washington's relationship with its allies in Eastern Europe is sacrosanct, we are told. It is all about unity, stability, butterflies, and unicorns. But has the real mission changed? Well, given that the U.S. last year launched a special NATO weapons program aimed at helping struggling NATO members share cost and buy American weapons together, the answer to that is probably no. ongoing tensions in Europe keep the defense dollars rolling in. Russia doesn't need to be a threat for this to work. It can just as easily be an imagined one. To keep small and relatively weak NATO members like the Baltics in a state of permanent fear and paranoia, Washington must convince them that they could be invaded by the Russian bear at any minute. In fact, a letter to the Irish Times recently from a retired Army officer even argued, quote, a limited but devastating war in Europe could suit the economic interest of the U.S. elite, unquote, so long as it was maintained at a non-nuclear and regional level. NATO's primary purpose today, therefore, is to create threats, real or imaginary, in the minds of the members, allowing U.S. defense contractors to rush in and sell outrageously expensive weaponry to those nations. The, quote, Russia threat, unquote, also provides a similarly excellent excuse to maintain astronomically high U.S. defense spending. No one is suggesting that NATO actually wants full-scale war with Russia, or that Vladimir Putin is a victimized angel, just that Russia can fill the role of convenient boogeyman rather brilliantly simply by existing. Moscow's latest offer to embark on a, quote, positive program, unquote, for developing friendly relations with NATO already looks dead in the water when you look at it that way. Great article. Just quickly mention the name of the author of this article, Danielle Ryan, Irish freelance journalist. Bang up job on this. Something that you're not going to see in the, at least in the media coverage on TV when it comes to NATO and Russia. This is all on our side, folks, us Americans. This is all on our side. This is all on us. I did a video on NATO a few weeks ago, and one of the comments was, when did we become the bad guy? And when you have what amounts to a military-industrial complex that was warned by Eisenhower, I think most of those who are watching this video will know what that is. When you have a military-industrial complex that needs to be fed on a regular basis, it needs to be fed one way or another. You see, terrorism isn't something that they can really fight because the terrorists are everywhere. So they have to establish an enemy for us to fight against. So that enemy has perpetually been Russia since after World War II, and it's going to continue to perpetually be Russia until we push it all the way to all-out war. And that looks like where we're headed. It is interesting to note that the one candidate of the two who is considered to be the most responsible is the one that would more likely cause a war with Russia, and that is Hillary Clinton. The Russians don't like her, and, well, it's funny. It's funny how convoluted this whole thing is, because if Hillary Clinton gets in, then you can definitely expect a new all-out Cold War with Russia. And if Donald Trump gets in, you can expect a world peace honestly, that will amount to him being regarded by the world much differently than he is right now. I know that Russia, for one, actually likes Donald Trump. It may not be a very bad thing, folks, to have someone in the Oval Office that is actually liked by Russia. Not that I am endorsing Donald Trump by any means. I'm simply saying that people need to take this into perspective, because the only reason that any kind of war with Russia is being pushed is the same reason I keep telling people the same thing. We are looking at an economic collapse that is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. How soon is soon? I don't know. Soon is a relative word, folks. So if it doesn't happen as soon as you think soon is, doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. After the economic collapse, the one way for governments to continue to establish that they have dominance and power and authority over you is to create a boogeyman, another nation to go against and fight. Now, this is going to be on both sides of the equation. I'm certainly not saying that Russia is going to be exempt from creating a boogeyman out of NATO, but considering that NATO is going out of their way to threaten Russia with expanding their military presence there in Eastern Europe, there's not going to be a very hard sell for the Russian people to say, hey, look, they're against us, because it certainly appears that way. This is Shindo. Have a good Sunday.